everyone. Welcome to Briar Haus Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and it is my honor to be able to have poet, photographer, educator, poet laureate for the state of Missouri, Mr. Justin Hamm, with us tonight. Justin is a 2024 and 2022 Woody Guthrie poet, 2020 Missouri Arts Council featured artist, winner of the 2014 Stanley Hanks Memorial Poetry Prize. Wow. Justin, welcome to our program.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Justin, can you tell us a little bit about your journey of how you became a writer?
I was one of those people that writing was kind of like a second heartbeat for me. So all the way back, I when I first started, I would make up these stories, and they weren't really stories; they were just lies, if I can be honest. And yeah, I used to get in a lot of trouble for that. And then finally, the adults in my life were like, "Well, there's this other thing you do where you tell stories, and they don't have to be true, and you can indulge that desire to tell those stories." And so I would tell like my aunts and uncles and be like, "I'm going to tell you a story right now, and it's a lie. Is that okay?" And they'd be like, "Sure." And then that's how I kind of developed it. So I always wrote. And then in my teenage years, everybody's got some angst. And I was an athlete. I played baseball. And so the arts weren't a huge part of what I was doing on a daily basis, but I needed that outlet. And so I
Mhm.
began writing poetry then. I wrote through college. I was a big reader, as most writers are,
Right.
and I loved it. And I always knew sort of that I was going to do something with writing. And I went to graduate school to get an MFA in fiction. Actually,
Oh.
I thought you could make money if you wrote fiction, which is also not true. So I spent that time developing my fiction writing chops, and when I finished my MFA, I became a teacher. And as anybody can tell you, the teachers don't have a ton of time to
Sure.
to finish things. You're so busy grading papers, especially for an English teacher. Like you're grading papers, you're doing all this to find time to finish longer form works was just impossible. So
Mhm.
for a few years, I didn't write much. I read primarily, and I went back and just read a lot of classics and things. And then when I came back, I wanted to write things I could finish. And so I started writing poetry then, returning to it for the first time in probably 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
And it just felt more natural this time. And I had a kind of an awakening about the Midwest too. I was always somebody, I wanted to get out of the Midwest, like most kids do. They think nothing's happening here. And so they want to get as far away from the Midwest as they can. And once I got married and had kids here and all those sorts of things, I realized I'm probably not getting away from here. Maybe I should pay a little more attention to what's around me. And I just kind of had this awakening. I started spending a lot of times driving through rural Illinois and rural Missouri. And so I started to take some pictures, and I started to really pay attention to the little towns through here, the imagery, and it just got into my bloodstream. It was natural because it was always the landscape that I was driving through. So it was already deeply embedded in me. I just never had thought to unlock it as a setting for literature before. And then suddenly I was looking at it differently, and I was like, this is, how could somebody resist making literature out of this? It's beautiful, it's interesting. And when that happened, that's when the click started. And then that's when I immediately sort of was able to write publishable poems after that, because I think I just found, the thing that was going to sustain my work.
Your niche. You found your
Exactly.
niche.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
sounds like
Exactly.
that old phrase, bloom where you're planted. You really did. You started like
Yeah.
blooming up. And since then, you've written five collections of poetry, right?
Correct.
Um, Justin, will you do me a favor and read some of your poems for us? We would love to hear
Yeah.
them.
This is called A Moment in Kansas. Somewhere in Kansas, a night train torches through the dark stomach of the prairie. The man in the car on the rural route turns his head for just a moment. He wonders if he has ever made his father proud, but only a moment. Now he turns from the disembodied flames. At the crossroad, he signals left. The engine hums the ballad of whatever comes after. Nah. This is three stanzas ending with God. One. Through a ragged church's single window eye, miles of narrow hallway strangled in weed and vine. Here you could pursue a whisper for centuries, backward or forward. Either leads directly to the cold lips of God. Two, the adjacent field. Two barns teeter and tilt away from one another like jealous siblings, trapped too long inside the same car or family. If the first ever decides to shove the second over, this is but one more way we might make measure of the swirling moods of God. Three, the heron leaps off the page of the Chinese poem and glides into my own, a broken corpse snake dangling from his bill. What else can this be? What else can this be but another love ballad about the clandestine arrangements of God?
What
And I'll
made you write
do
that one?
this one was built out of a few different things, but it started with photographs. So I, like I said, I travel through the landscape a lot. And so I had photographs of barns and I had a photograph of an old church that were in states of ruin. And I was looking back and thinking about them and I wanted to work those in. And then the third element for this was Robert Bly invented a form that similarly ends with they all end with the same kind of phrase at the end of each stanza. And I didn't really understand the form. I just liked kind of the echo of it. And so I thought I was stealing his form, but really I wasn't because I didn't understand it well enough to. And so it just became me approximating that form that he didn't. But I liked how it turned out. And so I thought the way that the final line echoes with God each time is kind of cool. Let's do one more, and I'm going to do something that's very, very different. So, the Midwest and Americana, they're always big elements in my writing. I told you I was a baseball player when I was younger. And
Right.
so this one, you might be able to tell that I did my MFA in fiction. This one is a longer narrative poem, and it does something a little different. I like to tell people this is the best poem I ever wrote about a jockstrap. It's called A Real Team Effort. And here you'd gone and told yourself the morning couldn't possibly get any worse. Not after you realized you'd left your jockstrap swinging from your bedroom doorknob as you rushed headlong into the purple prairie morning, late again for the 6 a.m. travel bus and facing the prospect of a doubleheader behind the dish without proper protection. And that's when you see it. Your mother's souped up Camaro comes peeling into the high school parking lot, skids to an action movie stop in front of the bus just as the driver jerks her into drive. And now, incredibly, here is your old man, sprinting in desperation, a thief or a madman. And there is something in his right hand, something which he has tucked against his side for protection, as if it were a football or perhaps an enormous jewel of untold value. There comes the pounding, and the driver cranks open the side door with impatience. And then he has your jock, which he has just received from your panting, sweat slicked pops. And he, the driver, is holding it out away from himself as if it might be radioactive. And now he's turning, handing it delicately to Coach, whose face goes cruel with wind sprints as he turns and passes it off to Klein, the freshie, cursed to the front seats for having ears too sensitive for upperclassmen conversation. And Klein, the freshie, hands off to Castillo, the backup catcher who's gunning for your job. And Castillo, with a snicker, gives it to Rosenthal. And Rosenthal, God help him, holds the thing a second too long and lifts it toward his nose. Then Martin, then Jonesy and Little Nick, and so it goes. Every man's hands on your jockstrap until it reaches that SOB Looney 2 seats up. Looney who could reach right out and hand it to himself. save you that final humiliation, but instead he passes it to the team manager who is sitting in the seat directly in front of yours because she is beautiful and because you planned it that way. Now she turns, and there it is dangling between you, frayed and a little off white from 2 years of use. Through the straps, you can see her eyes, two dark lakes where so many other sensitive boys have gone and gotten themselves thoroughly and finally drowned. You reach out to take what is yours, and you wonder, is this what the old broken men think of when they stare out their windows into empty backyards, swigging their warm beers and sighing now and then?
You definitely have a way with words. I feel
Thank
so
you.
sorry for that poor guy.
That poor guy was named me.
Oh
So
no, so this was true.
it's it's like most poems. It's got
A
more
little bit
than
of
a
truth.
kernel of truth. Yeah, it's got more than a kernel of truth, but you dramatize too in order to make it land for your audience. So
I think it landed, and all the poor kids were like, "Oh my gosh," they could so relate. Um, Justin, when you're crafting your poetry, like, do you have a particular way that you go about doing it? Because you talked about some form poetry, but do you have a style or a manner or something that you follow to get you from point A to the completion?
there's a lot of different ways that it happens, but it almost always starts with either a visual image or I'd call it an auditory image, but really um, like a phrase that sounds a certain way,
Hmm.
and you just know that kernel or that phrase is going to be in it, and then you start building around that. So I liken it to um, the way that I take photographs. Actually, they're very similar. I think it has to do with the kind of artist I am. But when I when I go out to shoot photos, I intentionally get lost.
Okay.
In the Midwest, in the back roads, I turn off GPS. I just don't worry about it. I just make sure I have enough gas, and then I turn it all off so I don't have to worry about what's coming. Because what I'm trying to do is court the element of surprise. So, I don't know what I'm going to see, but I know when I see it that that's what I want to take the picture of. And
Hmm.
I know that if it surprises me and I go, oh, there it is, that's going to be the initial reaction of the person who sees the photo too. If I do my job and I capture it correctly, and poems are kind of the same. I like to go into them, following that phrase, whatever it might be. And then what I'm doing is I'm taking different roads around, following the language, and all I'm really searching for again are these surprising images that might reveal, something metaphorical or something beautiful or something kind of mind-boggling in the consciousness of the person who's reading it. A poem like this last one is pretty straightforward, but even there, I started with some phrasing, the way that there's this kind of chain of the jockstrap being passed along. That's the form that the
Right.
poem follows, right? That's what it's kind of hanging on, and it was this guy, then this guy, then this guy, and this guy. That was the initial thing that I had, was like making the poem follow the passing along of the jockstrap. So it's always
And you're
something
building
like
up a
that.
crescendo.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so it's always something like that I'm kind of following along with. So
Well, it's very effective. And it certainly is something you can remember, almost like the poem Casey at the Bat, if you're familiar with that one.
yeah,
It
yeah.
sounds very familiar with that. Um, you also are an elementary school librarian.
Yes, I
How
am.
does that's just the coolest job, I would think, because
The
it,
shop.
it's just amazing to me. So tell me, how does that influence your poetry and how do the kids affect you?
Well, the kids keep you young and creative. So they don't have any kind of filter when it comes to creativity. Like legitimately, the only thing that stops them is if they're not enthusiastic enough. If you're crazy enough to come up with wild stuff, they'll try anything. And the thing is, they don't care whether what they come up with is good or not, and that's what's so beautiful. So they'll just toss anything out there, and you'll be listening to them, and you'll just stop, and you're like, "Holy cow! You don't have any idea how profound what you just said
What
was,"
you just
because it
said.
was they just right. they grab it out of the air, they make weird juxtapositions, sometimes even by mistake, right?
Mhm.
And you go, they don't even really know what they did, but because they're not shut off to creativity. And so that's one thing definitely for sure, is trying to capture that spirit of being unafraid to try anything, to start with any kind of phrase. And just remember that. And the other thing is to be, somebody who keeps the kids engaged. For me, I've had to learn to be creative on the spot. So I make up stories for them all the time, all kinds of ridiculous stories with and I just, it's a challenge that I put on myself. Like, I'm not going to come in with any preconceived notion. They're going to say, tell us a story. And I'm literally going to make the story up on the spot in front of them, tell a 10 or 15-minute story. And in a way, over the time that I've been a librarian, I've almost written a whole parallel literature to my poetry career in these stories that I've made up. And while none of them have been published, because they're always delivered orally to the kids, sometimes they last, sometimes they get forgotten.
Right.
But what I'm doing every time is sharpening that skill of improvisation, right? And that's so much of what poetry is. You've got to, to get a first draft down, you have to plug on to something else, or you have to find another road to take, to use that same metaphor that I was using before. And if you can't do that, then you're going to get stuck. And so that ability to take leaps and connect things, because I worked on it through improvising with the kids. The other thing is really just, I mean, if you get to do something that you really like, I tell people this all the time. I don't know how I lucked into this, but like, I really do love it. If they told me I could retire with all my benefits tomorrow, you wouldn't be able to drag me out of there. I just love being around them, and we just have fun. It's like having a built-in group of co-conspirators every day to like do the kind of stuff that we want to do. And so I just couldn't imagine not having my squad of kids every day to hang out with. Like, I don't know what I would do. I would come home and just be some sad sack guy. We
What would
just
you
we have a
do?
lot of fun. We get the Legos out. I don't know, but that's what I would say. Like, if you get to do something that you really really do enjoy every day, then you don't have that tiredness when it comes to your literature and your own creativity, because you don't feel like it's not like somebody who's like a copy editor, who wants to like copy edit for like 8 hours a day and then come home and try to write their own stuff after that. So there's no interference between what I do during the day and making literature, because it's pure joy all day. I don't mean to make it like romanticized, like that there's not
No, I
issues
believe
or that
you.
it's not
Yeah.
difficult. I just mean that there's very few days that I walk out of school and think anything other than like, I can't wait back, to come in tomorrow and see what other hijinks we're going to get up to.
This is your calling. You found your calling.
It's true. I was an English teacher for a long time, and I made this switch. And when I first switched, I was in the same school district for 17 years, and I was
Mhm.
an English teacher there for a long time. And then I became the district librarian and taught. So I would travel to every library and like help the kids with research or teach library classes and all those things. And the first time I had a kindergarten class, I had to get the kindergarten teachers to come back in and help me, because I didn't know what was going on. And I just thought, I think I've ruined my life.
Oh no.
What did I do? I went from teaching, college, dual credit college classes and honors English, to these kindergartners, and I was freaking out. But after about a year or two, I was like, it changed me. And I went, how did I ever not do this?
Well, Justin, where do you see, like in 50 years, children's literature? Where do you think it will be? Do you think that it will be holographic, or will it have a plate? Will libraries still be fully functional in 50 years? What do you think?
I don't think it's hard to say, what the powers that be will do. But if you want to talk about what the kids themselves would want, digital for books and things, right? There's no comparison. They love their phones and their devices and whatever. But when it comes to books, if you're hooking them on books, They want physical books with beautiful illustrations. They like the heft of a novel and like carrying it around. There's a prestige as a kid to carrying around the book that you're reading. If you create that culture, and kids want to do that. They want to have these cool books and things. So I don't think so. I think that everything that we do that gets away from the traditional book is sort of it's a bad decision. I think that it's more and more caving to an erosion of a certain skill set, right? Like I think, when you let everything go digital, it's so easy to pretty soon just let everything go artificial intelligence, and pretty soon, you're removing and allowing the machines to do, all of your thinking and for you. There's something to just going in a corner with a book and just interacting with the words and what's happening for you without any assistance from some machine.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I think there will always be people who care about it. I don't know if that's going to be the majority of people you know
I hope it will. Are you currently working on any kind of project?
so I'm always working on different projects and things. So interestingly enough, I just talked about how my children's book kind of stuff, my kid stories are like an alternate
Right.
literature. I spent some time writing down some of the best ones that I've told over 15 years. And so that's a thing that I have kind of in the creative hopper right now. I'm thinking about that. That's maybe something that I'm seeing for immediately after my tenure as poet laureate is up,
Hmm.
to kind of make that shift and do maybe a couple years of promoting some children's books and things. Otherwise, I'm writing poems always, um, and I don't always have a project in mind when I start writing them, but I think that your obsessions sort of create a poetry collection. I mean, some people can say this is the theme of it, and I'm going to write toward that. My themes are just my obsessions, and so they come back up enough that I don't usually have a lot of trouble making the collections feel cohesive. So I'm writing new things. I have stylistically, I'm trying to push myself a little bit. I'm doing some of these very long, breathless prose blocks,
Oh.
and I did that for performance reasons. So I told you that this is probably the book that I'm best known for, Drinking Guinness with the Dead, and
Hmm.
I did a lot of events, which was good. It helped me sell copies of it, more copies than I've sold of anything else. But also, I got so good at performing the poems that it was kind of like rote. I knew where everything was. I knew where people would laugh, where they'd sigh. I knew exactly which lines would land. And that's beautiful. But for me, what it's also kind of boring after a while because you feel like you're putting on the same event over and over.
You want
And
to do something different.
I don't enjoy that. And so these new poems in Oh Death, which is the newer book that was just out in 24. That's this one right here.
Wow, the
They
cover is
are
crazy. I love the
yeah,
cover.
yeah, my buddy who owns the bookstore down in Columbia, Missouri, he tells me they're selling tons of copies of it. He keeps reloading them and selling them. And I'm like, oh man, it's great to know these people like my poems. He goes, they like the cover, man. He does. Nobody's come back and told me what they thought of the poems, but they sure like the cover. And I said, well, I mean, that's one step closer to getting them to read it. But
That's
the
true.
poems in here I'll show you. Um, every single one of them is in these kind of just long prose blocks, and
Okay.
there's no punctuation. Uh, there's nothing to indicate where a sentence ends or where another one begins. And the reason that I did it that way is because when I read them out loud, I have to be totally tuned in to inflect them properly because I'll mess it up because I don't have my punctuation cues, so the whole thing's built around breaths, right? And so when I read it, I have to be totally locked in. I can't just mail it in, I can't fake it. And so the other thing that's cool about that is sometimes I won't read them the same because
Uh,
there's no comma or there's no in dash to say, interpret the line this way. And so sometimes I'll run something on and I'll run 4 or 5 lines on, and then
Mhm.
I'll slow way down and I'll be like, I don't know why I did that. Like there's no punctuation to tell me to do it. I just wanted to see how it sounded this time. And so it's cool. But at the same time, it's also it's a little risky, because early on, like I fumbled, and I fumbled it until, I was like, look, I really got to lock in and pay attention, because I cannot lose my, train of thought. I really have to put this poem across like a performance, not just trusting, that I can read what's on the page.
And the fact that you're able to do that is pretty spectacular because a lot of people struggle with performance art and being able to, they would much rather you read their poetry in a book than have to share it with you orally. So the fact that you can do both, Justin, is a gift. I mean, it truly
Learned
is.
so I was not always that way. I was a timid performer, a timid reader for a long time, and I realized after a while that the people that can put it across well, they sell more books, first of all, because you connect with your audience, and primarily that's where poets are selling their books, is through live performance, and then having so many people buy them, from that. And so I realized if I get up, and I butcher them live, there's no sense in even doing these events, because you're not, you're actually underselling how good the poetry is if you can't put it across, but
Well,
if you
I've
can
seen
give
you.
them,
I've seen you on your TED talk.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, you were so professional and so at ease on the stage. If everyone gets a chance, look him up on YouTube because Justin is an amazing performer. You really are.
Well, thank you for saying so. I really do appreciate that. I have some really good friends who come from a more performance poetry hybrid place. And as I started to be around them more and like watch how they delivered, I found kind of again my niche. It was kind of like, I'm not a strict performance poet, but
Hmm.
there are elements of that you can work into it, and you can fall somewhere in between. And then people will be like, you do a nice job of putting your poems across. So I'm just not built to be as dramatic sometimes as they are, but steady and having good inflection, and trying to have a cadence that people feel invited into. Those are things that you can learn and get better at.
Well, I think you do a terrific job. In fact, Justin,
Thank
tell us
you.
where we can find your work.
Well, you can get right now. Amazon, unfortunately, is the best place. I'm not a huge lover of Amazon, but you can get Drinking Guinness with the Dead. You can get Oh Death. Those are my two most recent collections. Amazon is the best place to get them right now. Ever since the poet laureate thing kind of dropped, me being able to keep my own stock of books has been pretty difficult. The desire for people to get signed copies, and so I try to keep them around for readings, and then they sell out pretty quick. And so anybody who wants to get them right away, just hop on Amazon, and that's going to be a good bet for you. I also have a book of photographs called Midwestern, and if you're interested in kind of the whole um, realm of influences and things that are part of the art that I make, the book of photographs Midwestern is a good one to have as an accompaniment or a companion, because I think you'll notice where the imagery and the poetry comes from. I think they're interlocked.
That is awesome. Well, Justin, thank you for your time today
Yeah.
with Briar House.
Well, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing it.